One of the places you can more frequently find competitive Super Smash Bros. Players is with their neck underneath a comically large red boot that says Nintendo on it, and they'll often be sort of like contorting their face to try to lick the boot. It's inescapable. Every time there's a big tournament, we're always on Twitter afterwards trying to prove to Nintendo that we're worth literally any amount of money. Poor Hungrybox is practically begging for the bag anytime he touches the microphone.
Please.
I don't think it'll happen. I don't think it can happen, but is that such a bad thing? I do think there's wasted potential there, but it doesn't come without upsides for both Nintendo and for Melee, which in my opinion has become the greatest esport of all time precisely because Nintendo has left it alone. First, let's talk about what the fuck is up with Nintendo. It seems like they're sitting on a gold mine with competitive Smash and just wasting it. After all, some esports initiatives like Riot's LCS have begun to peek their heads above water in terms of profitability, but even Smash has something that League of Legends doesn't, which is that it is far and away the most popular in-person esport in the world. And I know that's kind of useless right now given how COVID is going, but there's no doubt that a Nintendo-supported Smash scene would be enormously popular given how popular the Smash community is already. They've never provided any sort of financial or logistical support to Smash tournaments, though. The most that they'll do is slap their logo on the stream of Genesis or the Big House and make us run Splatoon ads for free, as if we have to, thank them for giving them free advertisement. In one way, Nintendo seems to be ideologically opposed to the idea of competitive gaming, and that's kind of evident in the design of the Smash games after Melee. They basically stripped away all of the things that made competitive Melee unique and interesting. And ever since then, they've been slowly trickling in some admittedly good mechanics and quality of life features, but I think it's safe to say that they're never going to make another Smash game like Melee again. Even with Ultimate, they've pretty much left competitive Smash alone. I mean, they do run their own online tournaments, but they have pretty wonky rule sets instead of the ones that we've been working on for 20 years in the competitive community, and the prizes are DLC and download codes for other Nintendo games? ARMS isn't a prize, it's just a waste of 2.2 gigabytes of storage that I could be using for a better fighting game like WWE 2K Battlegrounds. Now you might look at that and think, wow, they really hate us, but I do think that there's something else at play here. Write this down, folks, because it's going to come up over and over and over again. Esports will never be as big as they should be while their IPs are owned by companies whose primary motive is to push product. In a lot of cases, developers realize that they can make esports part of their product, or at least marketing for their product, but I think what makes Smash so different is that it contains the IP from so many different developers. I can only imagine the pain in the ass that it was to get the rights to all of those characters in the first place, and anything having to do with esports would cause another 10 rounds of negotiation to figure out how to divvy up all of that money. So Nintendo abandoned us so they could put Minecraft Man in Smash, which I think we can all agree is shitty and dumb.
Konnichiwa, Steve Des.
But it's kind of hard to argue against having all of the most important video game characters in history in one place, and it paid off. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is far and away the best-selling fighting game of all time, having sold over 20 million copies. But that aside, what does the alternative even look like? Street Fighter is pretty cool, and Capcom does put together tournaments that actually pay out real money to people. This surely boosts the popularity of the FGC, which is always a plus, and Capcom's resources can help with some infrastructure things like standardized rule sets and having some oversight over conduct. This really comes in handy in cases like the effective ban of infiltration, and then it all goes to shit when infiltration gets to come back to EVO like nothing ever happened. Capcom plays an important role in the Street Fighter scene, but again, this is a marketing initiative, and those interests might not always align with the interest of the players within the community. In fact, it seems like the consensus among Street Fighter players is that they prefer older versions of the game to Street Fighter V. There's no chance that Capcom will support Street Fighter 4 or Third Strike because that's not the product that they're selling at the moment. Nintendo's corporate indifference to competitive Smash and game design choices that they made when they were developing Super Smash Bros. Brawl left the door cracked open for a grassroots Melee scene to survive past its sequel, and the community busted that shit wide open. There are a million videos on the internet about what makes Melee's gameplay so unique and why people didn't really like Brawl very much, so I'll just link to one of those videos. It basically boils down to the fact that Melee players just love their game a whole lot. What I would like to do is to chronicle the buck wild stuff that the Melee community did to continue playing and improve Melee itself. Melee came out in 2001. It runs at 480p at best. It has no online play, and it comes on a tiny disc that inevitably gets left out of the box and destroyed. On its own, it doesn't have the legs to be a good modern competitive game, but everyone remembers playing Melee with their friends. That's what the game is designed for, and all these years later, that's still what the community feels like. From 2001 to 2019, the primary way that people played Super Smash Bros. Melee was by sitting down in the same room together. And Smash tournaments have their origins in humble settings like this one. Some of the first majors were actually hosted in people's houses. I think it's this common thread, combined with the gameplay that everyone on YouTube raves about, that gives Melee a strong pull to this day. So to zoom through the early parts, Melee had some early highs, including being part of the MLG competitions, like the one where PC Chris won $10,000. This is all pretty well chronicled in the Smash Bros. Documentary. And then in 2008, Brawl came out, and a lot of people started to play the new game, but a lot of people hated it. Brawl was really different, and it was different in such a way, like I mentioned, that gutted most of the things that people liked about competitive Melee. But since Nintendo wasn't putting any pressure on competitive players to move on to Brawl, people just kind of kept on playing Melee. The community was relatively small up until 2013, when Melee was a part of EVO's Breast Cancer Research Foundation donation drive, in which the community that raised the highest amount of money would be included as the final game of EVO's lineup. The Spirit Bomb of Legends came through, the Melee community raised almost $100,000, and Melee was given the final slot at EVO 2013. EVO is the largest fighting game tournament series in the world, and it got a lot of eyes on Melee, but there was a stark reminder that the big Nintendo boot is still there and still ready to crush some vertebrae. 2 days before the tournament, Nintendo told EVO that they weren't allowed to stream Melee at their event. Well, at least that's what EVO told us. We later learned that Nintendo didn't want them to host the Melee tournament at all. Folks didn't like that. People drummed up some bad public relations, and thankfully Nintendo caved to the Twitter mob just hours later. Melee put on a show that would become the largest fighting game stream of all time at that point, peaking at over 134,000 concurrent viewers. It was also the largest Melee tournament to that point, with 709 entrants, more than doubling the previous record. 3 months later, filmmaker and community member Samox released the Smash Bros. Documentary, which was so popular that an entire contingent of new players who started playing in 2013 and 14 became known as Doc Kids, myself included. The confluence of the documentary, EVO, and Smash 4's release put a lot of eyes on competitive Smash, and most of those eyes were funneled towards Melee. The community was bigger than it ever had been, and a lot of people got to work on bringing Melee up to speed with what the rest of the esports landscape looked like.
Okay, alarm whoop, void alert.
So it's at this point in the video that I'm going to have to ask all Narcs, Square's, Nintendo employees, and game developer apologists to fuck off. Piracy has been huge for making Melee sustainable. Wii's have a little tiny GameCube inside of them, which is great because it makes them backward compatible for Melee, and there are a lot more Wii's than GameCubes. Anyone who's ever been to a Goodwill knows this because there's always a Wii Fit balance board on the rack right below the rhythm game peripherals. The Wii is also very easy to hack, and SD cards replace tiny discs as the primary way of playing Melee. Just download an ISO from... pop that baby in and you got free to play Super Smash Bros. Melee. This is how 99% of Melee tournaments run, the only exceptions being the really big ones where Nintendo watches over us but doesn't give us any money. In 2014, Achilles 1515 released the 20XX Training Pack. This was the first major mod for Super Smash Bros. Melee, and it aimed at providing more robust training features. It made use of reading the game state, which was important for implementing things like visual indicators for missed L cancels. This capability has been incredibly important for a lot of the work done with Melee. More recently, Uncle Punch's training mode has become a popular practice mod, which makes use of this functionality to display a whole bunch of useful on-screen feedback. People weren't just hacking their consoles though, they were also emulating them, and as early as 2013, people started using the netplay functionality of Dolphin Emulator to play Melee online. And the online community for Melee steadily grew, but for a long time it was very limited. Matchmaking was mostly hosted on this website called Anther's Ladder, where players could exchange netplay codes and compete in ranked matches to place on said ladder. Playing anyone from more than a couple hundred miles away though was completely unbearable, and it was pretty hardware and network intensive, but we'll get back to online Melee. There are still some limiting hardware factors that Melee has to contend with. GameCube controllers are the only controllers that are compatible with playing console Melee, and they're in short supply. Nintendo released new batches of GameCube controllers after the release of Smash 4 and Smash Ultimate, but the well ran dry pretty quickly. Currently, your best bet for buying first-party GameCube controllers is to go to eBay, where they're used and expensive. What makes matters worse is that some things in Melee are actually controller dependent without the use of mods. Namely, dashbacks and shield drops are easier on some controllers than they are on others. You were basically forced to play a controller lottery and hope that the already expensive controller that you bought wasn't a dud, and usually it was. But in 2017, Dan Salvato, who also made this anime game, released Universal Controller Fix, or UCF, which alleviated some of the controller-related problems. A similar problem exists because of the fact that Melee outputs analog video. Any processing to turn that signal into a digital one causes significant lag, and for this reason, up until very recently, CRT televisions were the only displays that Melee tournaments were ever played on in person. Most in-person tournaments are still run on CRTs, but they're bulky and annoying, and they can be in short supply because nobody makes them anymore. And unlike Wii Fit balance boards, Goodwills in my area don't carry them anymore. It turns out though that there are certain mods which can eliminate latencies inherent in the game and make Melee play as fast on a monitor as it would on a CRT. And this not only works on console, but it also works on emulator as well. Hacks made a good video describing how this works, and he also ran a pretty successful tournament on monitors up until the COVID-19 pandemic called Hacks' Nightclub. Then, hoo boy, things started to get nuts, and a lot of it revolved around this guy named Fizzy. Fizzy started up Project Slippy in 2017, which revolved around a lot of projects having to do with reading the game state of Melee like we talked about earlier. The first portion of this project allowed for replay capability via Dolphin emulator, and it kept certain stats. Eventually, this was developed into a system where a console could connect to a Dolphin emulator via the Wii's online functionality, and the game state of the Wii could be read in real time. This was a huge improvement for Melee streamers. Beforehand, capturing Melee at its full 480p resolution was an expensive proposition that involved using CRT monitors, powered video converters, and specialized capture cards. Slippy eliminated the need for all of that, and not only did it make streaming high-quality Melee accessible, it allowed for console replays to be saved on a USB drive, functionally meaning that every tournament set at any given event could be recorded. Then, 3 months into a pandemic which confined players to the unfamiliar territory of exclusively laggy netplay, our father Fizzy descended from Melee heaven on June the 22nd, 2020, to strap a jet engine to the 2001 Honda Civic that was Super Smash Bros. Melee. Not only was matchmaking programmed directly into the game's UI, making it unnecessary to go to a third-party website, but online Melee was now programmed to run on rollback netcode. This is hugely important for fighting games, especially one as technical as Melee. Seeing your opponent do something occasionally that didn't make a whole lot of sense is a lot more bearable than stuttering every few seconds, especially during the middle of a timing-intensive input. This made cross-continent netplay possible, and in a lot of cases, better than delay-based netplay with people even in your region. This was certainly true for me. I would go so far as to say that Melee has an objectively better online experience than Smash Ultimate at this point, and it's only going to get better with the addition of spectator functionality for tournaments and a ranked mode. Nintendo created Melee as a really fun game to play with your friends, but the Melee community turned it into a fucking masterpiece with like negative help from its developer. Almost every obstacle in the way of good competitive Melee has been overcome. Lack of online play, lack of consistent controllers, necessity to play on CRTs, the game not being free. We obliterated all of that. Not only did Nintendo stay out of the way and let us do their job for them, God rest Project M's soul, but we actually did it in spite of Nintendo. If Nintendo had taken the Capcom approach, they would have made none of the decisions that the Melee community had made, and they just would have shepherded us all into Brawl in the later games. Even if they made a Melee HD, I am 99% sure there would be something horribly wrong with it. It will never be as good as Slippy. So last time we talked, I told you about how I think that everybody should pick something to get good at their lives and really try at it without fear of failing. And I told you how I think esports and Smash Bros in particular is a really good option because of its accessibility and the nature of its community. Assuming you bought all of that, I want you to consider your options, and there are a lot of really good options. The spectacle and stakes of MOBAs, the fast-paced action of team shooters, Minecraft Man, the definitely second place Rocket League. I think that Melee ticks all of the boxes that these games do and more. And it all happened because we love the game so goddamn much that we wouldn't let it die. That's the secret ingredient. That's what I want from a community. A ton of work went into preserving and improving Melee, not just so that it survives as 1.36 gigabytes of code, but so that the ethos of going to a place called the Poop House and playing around the world with your friends until 3 a.m., at which point you get angry because you've lost 12 straight games with Bowser, and you get in your car and you leave without saying goodbye to everyone, echoes every time that we pick up the sticks. Melee is the greatest esport of all time. Melee community, I am once again asking for your support so that we get our shit together to look nice for any new folks who might be watching us. Like I said before, the only two reasons that we want Nintendo money are one, to attract new players, and two, to help us out with conduct issues. There are a lot of factors going forward that I think could draw people into Melee and keep them engaged. Slippy, of course, is a revelation, and it's only going to get better with the ranked mode. A new documentary is coming out soon, hopefully, and a ton of people are making really cool content about Melee tournaments, and of course, instructional content aimed at helping other players get better. A COVID vaccine might bring us back to in-person tournaments sometime in 2021, but there are a lot of high-quality online tournaments that you don't even have to leave your house for right now. Shout out in particular to Untitled, Rollback Rumble, Training Mode Tuesdays, and the weekly for my home state of Arizona, Wired Weekly Wednesdays. We might be shaping up for a new Melee renaissance like in 2013 and 14, but we don't really have the big guns that Nintendo does in terms of promotion. This, however, is where Ludwig and Raid Shadow Legends come in. As far as conduct goes, once again, this is the real sticking point. I think we're headed in the right direction, and we are bolstered a bit by the fact that we don't have to contend with corporate interests when we make decisions. We're just acting in the interests of our community and our players. The community is talking about these important issues now more than ever, and TOs are using their platforms and influence to help make our communities safer. But on the other hand, I've also seen TOs have pedophiles come to their in-person tournaments which violate local law. Like I said last time, use your platforms for good, make sure that gamer basement culture doesn't turn into exclusionary culture, and help support our grassroots institutions however you can. If you don't know much about Melee, I suggest you go and download Slippy right now and get going. If you've been playing Melee for years, you should probably go give Fizzy some money at his Patreon. And, maybe consider sharing this video with a friend. If you're here from Reddit, I'd like to let you know that I love you less than anyone else. But all the same, breathe easy, gamers, free from the trachea-crushing Tims of Doug Bowser. At least for now. See ya.
No goofing off. Serious VoIP. This VoIP is for masters only.